Wow. Some other offshoot cases as a result of the Epstein litigation that you were involved in and you brought were a series of defamation cases against people. So categorically, I know you sued Ghislaine Maxwell for defamation. I know that you sued Alan Dershowitz for defamation. How many defamation cases did you guys file?
I think that those are the only two related defamation cases. I had the malicious prosecution case against Jeffrey Epstein, which was similar but different. And with defamation cases, the devil's in the details. But the broad strokes were...
Yeah, what were the theories of those cases?
So we represented, one of the victims that we represented, I think we started representing her 2014 or so, was Virginia Roberts. And Virginia Roberts was one of the minor victims, under 18 victims, that traveled nationally and internationally on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. So there was hard evidence of him trafficking minors across state and international lines. So she was an important client of ours, became a good friend of ours, and we represented her as she wanted to get into the Crime Victims' Rights Act case and help us to invalidate the Jeffrey Epstein's non-prosecution agreement. So that was the initial context.
Right. To invalidate the sweetheart agreement he reached before you ever got involved in his case.
Exactly. Because one of the defenses the government was lodging was the girls were all coming to Jeffrey Epstein's home locally. It wasn't nationally or across borders. Yet that defense was a lie. They knew about Virginia Roberts. They knew about her travel. They knew all of these things, but they also knew Virginia Roberts had escaped to Australia, so she likely wasn't going to surface and throw egg on their face. Mm-hmm. But here she was. She surfaced. She had become a client of ours, and so we were moving her into the Crime Victims' Rights Act case. And one of the things she said was that, I'll get the quote wrong, but one of the things she said was that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell had sex trafficked her. She was a victim of sex trafficking by both of them. Now, Jeffrey Epstein was smart enough not to respond, but Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't. She responded by saying, essentially, she's a liar. That's not true. So we filed. Now, the statute of limitations had run on filing a sex trafficking or sex abuse case against Ghislaine Maxwell, but a defamation case hadn't, because that is from the time that the defamation occurs. Ghislaine Maxwell calling her a liar, it then pitted, was Virginia Roberts telling the truth that she was a sexual abuse victim and sexual trafficking victim of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, or was she telling a lie? And in which case, there would be a defense to the defamation case. So we sued Ghislaine Maxwell for that. But really, at the heart of it is Ghislaine Maxwell a sex trafficker? I'll tell you, during that civil litigation, and only during that civil litigation, we uncovered all of the people that ultimately, when I say all, every single victim that testified as a victim or a witness against Ghislaine Maxwell in her ultimate criminal trial years later in 2020, mm-hmm. we discovered them during that defamation case that started in 2015. But for Ghislaine Maxwell making that statement that Virginia Roberts is a liar, there's no way she would be in prison right now. Zero chance.
Wow.
Every single one of those witnesses was us turning over every stone to prove Virginia Roberts was telling the truth when she made the statement.
Incredible. It's just funny how things turn out sometimes, right?
Yeah. Gotta watch what you say.
Yeah, they say that prisons are full of people who thought they could get away with it. And she's clearly one of them. My thought about her is that 20 years, it's very nice. Not enough for her. But
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you because I've said this before too. But for her influence, Jeffrey Epstein never becomes the serial abuser that he did become. He always wanted to, but without her influence and her connections, he never could have done it.
And as I said at the beginning of the show, Brad, today, but for your tireless efforts and Brittany's tireless efforts, but for that persistence and that grit that you demonstrated, they might still be doing it today. Both of them, Epstein and Maxwell.
Without any doubt. Without any doubt. When we instigated the New York investigation that had him arrested, and we worked, all of us, very secretly before he was arrested, that was one of the scariest times of the case. I don't think that any other lawyers would have done what we did because it was a very risky operation that we were involved in.
In what way?
So it's the end of 2018. Jeffrey Epstein apologizes to me publicly for as part of the settlement to the malicious prosecution. And he said to me, I have a divorce from you now. Like, I'm done with you. And I think that most people would have let it go. But I took that as, look, he's not going to see me coming anymore. It's time now to not only investigate, but unveil what he's still doing, which is international sex trafficking.
He was still doing it.
Oh, he's still doing it till literally the trip that he was arrested on. He was still doing it till the very end.
And where was he trafficking these people to, these underage?
So he changed a little bit. Once he went to jail in 2008, he gets out in 2010, and what he decides
He gets out from spending weekends in the Palm Beach County Jail.
Not only spending weekends in the Palm Beach County Jail, but engaging in illegal sex while he's on work release at his office.
During the week.
With victims. When he was released, his work was only engaging in illegal sex with victims of his.
I know they let him hang out at some oceanography office or something.
Yeah.
Some BS office, but that's what he was doing.
That's what he was doing. The Florida Science Foundation, the Florida Science Center, that was his company that he established for his work release, was really just a place for him to go and make sex abuse and sex trafficking victims engage in sex with him while he's wearing his ankle monitor. That's all that was happening. There was no other productive business going on. But I digress. When 2019, we start working with the Southern District of New York, and we had great prosecutors that were really listening to. Alex Rossmiller, I think, is one of the very best prosecutors I've ever worked with. Him and Allison Moe and Maureen Comey were all in on the idea that if he's still trafficking, we're going to get him. And so we started pulling together some of our clients that, one, we knew were strong victims that would hold up in court. Two, they wouldn't get frightened off. And during that period of time, I was still meeting with Jeffrey Epstein. Like, why was I still meeting when the case is over? Because the Crime Victim Rights Act case was still annoying Jeffrey Epstein. Because remember, by that time, the point of the Crime Victim Rights Act case was to invalidate his non-prosecution agreement, which he was scared of. So he would call me and meet with me at Starbucks during that 6-month period of time before he's arrested in 2019. And he started getting paranoid. He would look over my shoulder and say, who's that guy in the parking lot? As if I have people watching him, which it's just random people. So I knew this is not Jeffrey Epstein, the one who is always in control. He's losing it. Like, he thinks something is about to happen. And he said, look, I'm getting rumors that the FBI is looking at me again. Why? And I said, oh, that's only because we're trying to work out a settlement with the government on the Crime Victim Rights Act case, which wasn't true, but I was trying to give him a reason why. Because he had sources in the FBI. Why are people in the FBI looking at him? So I was calling the prosecutors and saying, I hope you get him arrested soon because it's getting scary.
What do you mean he had sources in the FBI?
Oh, my God. He knew information. Every single time that I went to the FBI, he would know about it before I got back to my office. He would call and tell me about it. There was a time we called the FBI in 2000, and we're going to bring Jean-Luc Brunel, who was another recruiter he used, bad guy, who ultimately also got arrested for sex trafficking, of Virginia Roberts. We did an interview with him in New York and called the prosecutors and said, we want to bring him in tomorrow morning to tell you about the ongoing Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking operation. It was not 5 hours later that we got a call from Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer saying, we hear that you're bringing Jean-Luc into the office tomorrow. Tell Jean-Luc that if that happens, he will have waged war against Jeffrey, and he knows what that means. Jean-Luc didn't want any piece of that and left. It was right away. As soon as information went to the feds, Jeffrey Epstein had it. It wasn't until Alex Rossmiller and that crew of prosecutors and the FBI agents at the very end knew that they had to really protect this investigation that they were able to pull it off without Jeffrey knowing exactly what was going on.
To complete their investigation, to impanel a grand jury, and to get him indicted ultimately and arrested.
Yeah.
Amazing, amazing story. I know you had some other offshoot cases against multiple other people associated with Epstein, about 25 or so, you told me. Friends, associates. Who are these people generally? You don't necessarily have to put a name on it. Who are they, and what sorts of things did you go after them for doing?
Yeah, so I would couch it this way, is that there is always this talk about when is the Jeffrey Epstein list coming out? And I think that the public believes there's like a list of Epstein clients, as if Epstein was sending girls to people to collect blackmail. It's not really true in that extreme sense, but I will tell you what he did do. When Jeffrey Epstein was tired of certain of the girls that he was abusing, and by tired I mean they had aged out. Jeffrey Epstein likes a certain age range. But
once they turned 18, he was not interested in them anymore?
It wasn't actually 18. So if he started abusing somebody at 16, sometimes he would abuse that person until they were 24, 25 years old. And as they got older, the abuse would actually get worse. Take their passports, threaten them with immigration problems, use more force, get them isolated on an island. The abuse was nastier, much more egregious as they got older, because he knew he had to exert a different level of authority to gain the same level of control. As people get older and mature, they start using resources to get away. He would then just disarm them of all those resources, so he had to be more aggressive with them. And that was just his pattern. But as somebody got older and he said, you know what, now this person's no longer useful for me here. I'm going to act like I'm giving them a break and allow them freedom from what is this kind of sex and slavery. He would send them to certain friends. Now, he did have ulterior motives there. It wasn't to be kind to his friends like it was a gift. It was to ultimately have this victim to bring him information back that he could use if necessary. Not a whole lot of evidence that he actually had to use it, but there's all kinds of evidence that these individuals, when they found out, hey, this is a really bad guy, they couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't report him because now he had some blackmail on them.
He had information on them for future negotiations, as we say.
Exactly. And whether
Right?
he actually had to use that for future negotiations, who knows? But he got a lot of business deals done that he otherwise probably wouldn't have received, but for accumulating dirt on these various individuals. So let's just say that over the years, there's 25 of those individuals. Several of those people, legitimately, we tried to do what was right. Investigate the bad guys, investigate the good guys, but if we learned that they were good guys, shaking somebody down because they happened to accidentally, purely accidentally, do something with somebody who was an adult that we thought that they may want to pay their way out of, that's not us. That's not who we are. Mm-hmm. So it was try to focus on, of these 25 guys, who knew at the time that Jeffrey Epstein was a bad guy? Who knew that he was controlling these various women? Who knew that these women were actually his sex slaves? Or who actually believed they were in New York, wanted to go out on a date, treated it like a date, worked up a relationship? That's a different category of person. So it took us a long time to investigate who was who. But also, our clients helped us because they would say, look, I have a relationship with this now very famous or very powerful person, and it's very good. I could call him on my cell phone right now. He never mistreated me. He didn't know what was going on. So they also steered the ship. I would say of those 25, 10 to 15 had bad motives. And with any of them, we always told each client, look, we can launch a war right away.
A war meaning litigation.
Yeah, war meaning litigation.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of power on the other side, but we have the facts, we have the evidence, and we're ready to go. But also, you got to figure out what stage you're at in your life. When many of them wanted to move on, they wanted it to be confidential, but they wanted somebody to be held responsible. And so we worked up confidential settlements. And I think, I'm not a big fan of confidentiality, but it serves a purpose in a certain circumstance, and this was the right circumstance, where many of these people had been through real hell with Jeffrey Epstein,
right.
And now it was these offshoots, as you call them, and they say, look, this guy's a bad guy, but he's not as bad of a guy. It's not something that the prosecutors are ever going to arrest the person for. It's not that type of criminality, but it's something that from a civil aspect, I'd like for that person to be held responsible, and we did, I think, a very effective and good job of making that happen and carrying out the interests of our clients. There are still people that I personally think should have been exposed, but not at the expense of your client's wishes.
Right.
Like, client comes first, and then I did think there were certain that should have been exposed, and I think that there's going to be one that's going to happen in the next month that really should be exposed and will be. So it's a lingering case that's about to kick off.
I reserve the right to bring you back on a future episode so we can talk about that when it comes out. Let's talk about...
I can't wait when it comes out.
And you know you're always welcome here because Brittany's coming back anyway, right? Let's talk about Harvey Weinstein. He knew Epstein?
He did know Epstein.
And talk about that, please.
Yeah, the interesting thing is the way that I found out that Harvey Weinstein knew Epstein was from Epstein. Epstein called me when it first was hitting the media that Harvey was this kind of predator in the movie industry. And he called me and said, look, see what you're doing to me, Brad? You're putting me in a category that's worse than this guy. And let me tell you.
Worse than Harvey Weinstein.
Worse than Harvey Weinstein. And I've known Harvey for so long, and I've known that he's a bad guy. I've known that he was a predator. And I think that what you have done then is turn the world against me to see me in the same light as him. And I said, I didn't know that you knew each other. And he went on telling me various stories of Harvey Weinstein being a bad guy, but basically in generalities. And then it was not that long after that I got a call from one of our clients saying, hey, I had an interaction with Harvey Weinstein when I was very young, and here's how the interaction went. I was 18 years old, just flown to France with Jeffrey Epstein under coercion and duress at all times. My entire life was controlled by Jeffrey Epstein. And he said, I have a friend, a close friend of mine in a room, go give him a massage. And this is the girl talking, says, I went in to give him a massage and he threw $20 at me and said, you're going to fill in the blank with sexual acts. And she said no and ended up running out and telling Jeffrey Epstein, Jeffrey then went back in the room, kicked Harvey out of his house, said, get the F out of here. And that was also when I later told Jeffrey, hey, I know this story about this other victim. He said, yeah, that's one of the examples where I was the good guy. I protected her against Harvey. Harvey was this pig of a person. And she wasn't the only one of Jeffrey's enslaved girls that Harvey at least attempted to sexually assault.
Wow.
Bad guys know each other.
I guess so. Harvey Weinstein's in prison, but for his own misdeeds, not for anything directly connected to the Epstein cases.
Yeah, in fact, I think that all of his attempts, I don't think that he accomplished any of them. And that one, treating one of Jeffrey Epstein's girls like too cheap, is what offended Jeffrey Epstein, and that's what ended the relationship.
Wow. That's pretty incredible. By the way, you mentioned about Epstein's house in the Virgin Islands. I always found it to be quite ironic. That's the name of the place where his island is. You've been to that island.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
When Brittany and I flew down to the U.S. Virgin Islands to attend the probate hearing, and ultimately it turned into our meeting with the Attorney General, we decided we were so close that we had to go see the island. So we contacted a guy who runs he has a boat. Him and his wife run this like day trip where they travel.
A charter.
Yeah, charter, but it's not for fishing or anything. It's just to travel around the islands. And we said, how close can we get to Jeffrey Epstein's island? And he said, you can get about 500 yards, and we could let you take pictures. We didn't tell him who we were.
And by this time, Epstein was dead.
Yeah, this time he just had died. So it could be end of 2019 or beginning of 2020.
But you were down there in connection with the probate proceedings in the Virgin Islands and about over his estate.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So the island's like possession of the estate at that point. He's dead. So we get on this charter, and it's just Brittany, me, and this husband and wife, and we're driving over to his island, and Brittany goes up and hands the boat captain her phone and says, hey, I want you to just take pictures of us, but still doesn't tell him anything. And she brings to me these flippers, and she says, hey, look, we're so close. Don't you think that we have to go there? I said, yeah, I can't look at this and think all of these clients have told us the hell that it is on the island, the isolation, the I can't escape. Don't you think that we have to at least be there to see if we can experience what they're even talking about, like what that isolationism even feels like? She said, no doubt. I said, these people are going to be so mad, they might leave us. Like, we might be stuck on this island forever. She looked over and she says, I think we can swim. I think we can get back to shore. Like, all right, cool. So we put on these flippers, and the boat captain says, wait, what are you guys doing? You can't swim here. We literally just dive off of the front of the boat, swimming towards the island. And Brittany yells back, just take pictures. So we end up getting pretty close. We both take off of our flippers and we both step on sea urchins. And then I remember our client saying, so that girls could not escape the island, Jeffrey put sea urchins surrounding the island. It's true.
Wow.
It's true.
Unbelievable.
I was like, oh my God, how are we going to get there? So we end up putting our slippers back on, stepping on all the sea urchins, getting onto the island, and the boat captain took a picture of us sitting on a bench on the island from the boat. He still wasn't happy, but he did capture it.
Incredible. And that really probably brought a little bit of closure.
It did.
To be on this island that had played a part in these horrendous things that had happened with this moat of sea urchins.
Eerie feeling and a true appreciation for of any of the victims. There's nothing that anybody could have done to escape whatever he wanted to do to him once there.
Incredible. Brad, let's talk about the class action cases that were brought by you and David Boies, who I know you brought in as co-counsel on these cases, against J.P. Morgan, which ultimately settled for $280 million, as well as another class action against Deutsche Bank, which ultimately settled for $75 million. First of all, talk about those cases and what specifically was your legal theory against those companies.
During the Epstein Victim Claim Program, where we represented 71 or more victims in the program, we learned so many more details as we were getting more information from victims. And one thing that struck us was all of the minors Jeffrey Epstein is paying $300, $400 of cash every single person. He's also engaging in this illegal sex 3 times a day. He's also paying their recruiters $300 or $400 a day.
Three times a day was...
Three times a day was his routine.
That was his MO? Wow.
Every day abusing 3 different girls a day, at least. So if he's paying in cash, the victim and the victim recruiter, and there's up to 6 of them a day that he's paying $300 a day, he has to have access to a lot of cash at a time period where people aren't carrying that much cash. He's having to have thousands of dollars going out every single day, which in the aggregate means somebody is giving him a lot of cash. There has to be a follow the money here. We also started meeting a lot of Eastern European women who were being sent wire transfers. I'm going, okay, wait. After he's a registered sex offender, he gets out of jail and he's still getting access to tons of cash. He's also making wire transfers, which seem to be dozens and dozens of young females. What is the bank doing?
Young females in Europe who he would ultimately traffic over to the United States and for more of the same?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And so we thought the bank has to have known what Jeffrey Epstein has been up to for a long period of time. Why would they tolerate this? And the answer has to be he's bringing them a lot of money. So then we start researching some of his high net worth friends and reading about business deals with them that he's engaging in and thinking, okay, wait, I bet he's also bringing accounts to the various banks. So I had this idea that Jeffrey Epstein could not have operated this particular type of sex trafficking operation where you need access to a lot of cash and you're able to wire transfer either to victims, people we know are sex trafficking victims, or their schools, their ballet programs, whatever it is, without everyone at the bank on the top levels knowing what he was doing. He needed a financial infrastructure. The banks provided the financial infrastructure for a known sex trafficking operation. What we also had going for us is everybody asked the question, where did Jeffrey Epstein get his money? Forget that question. What did Jeffrey Epstein do for a living? all he did was sex trafficking. That's all he did. There's no legitimate business that he did. Now, we ultimately found out that he was just a high-level grifter, con artist of other billionaires, but mainly on a day-to-day basis, he was only concerned with sexual abuse and sex trafficking. So the theory was, let's file the lawsuit against Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan, knowing that those are his two primary banks. He used JP Morgan from the 90s through 2013, and then he switched over to Deutsche Bank from 2013 to 2019, and file it as a class action, because what they did, the bank did, is the same. They provided him the money he needed to operate the operation. And what we found during the case solidified every belief that we had, and then some.
Quick question for you. I know that for these ultra high net worth individuals, banks treat them differently than they might treat me or anyone else. And they assign handlers, people to watch over their money, to see what they're doing, to make sure that the bank is not complicit in some kind of organized crime scheme or anything else. Is that generally the way that they're set up and structured?
Yes.
Did he have handlers?
Many.
At these banks?
At the highest levels.
And so how did that turn out once you got into these cases? How much did they really know?
They knew everything. In fact, JP Morgan knew more about what Jeffrey Epstein was doing and with whom before the Palm Beach police investigated in 2005 than anyone else in the world, because they actually opened accounts for several of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. They handled not only Jeffrey Epstein's personal accounts, but dozens of companies that were shell companies that were just moving money around that had no legitimate purpose. And for a bank, you have know your customer laws. They didn't know any of their customers. They knew Jeffrey Epstein. No bank employee, none, could tell us what Jeffrey Epstein did legitimately. You can't have a 20-year banking relationship with somebody that's a billionaire and have no idea how he made his money or what he was doing on a daily basis. But also, in your banking records, see that he's withdrawing tens of thousands of dollars of cash every week, to the tune of, he was withdrawing cash on an average of greater than $1 million a year. $1 million a year in cash. When I say cash, I'm saying dollars, like $20 bills. Why would you need that much cash? On top of that, remember, he gets arrested in Palm Beach in 2008, and the Palm Beach police report comes out saying he's using this cash to pay victims and recruiters. At that point in time, JP Morgan knows what he's doing, right? He's still, after he gets out of jail, still withdrawing that type of cash.
And they still kept him as a depositor.
Not only kept him as a depositor, they assigned their number 2 at the whole bank at JP Morgan, Jess Staley, to be his handler. Jess Staley then became a friend of Jeffrey Epstein's. He came down while Jeffrey Epstein was in jail. He maintained communication with Jeffrey Epstein while Jeffrey Epstein was on work release here. He went to Jeffrey Epstein's island. He went to Jeffrey Epstein's Palm Beach house. He visited very frequently Jeffrey Epstein's place in Manhattan. So they became even tighter friends after Jeffrey Epstein was convicted and pled guilty in Florida, and continued the operation. Right when Jeffrey Epstein got out of jail in Florida, hit the ground running, sex trafficking all over again. He couldn't have done it without JP Morgan. Now, in 2013, JP Morgan realizes, hey, there's no way that we as a bank are going to be able to justify the amount of cash that this guy's pulling out after we know that his sex trafficking scheme involves a lot of cash. So they kicked him out of the bank.
Yeah, but before that happened, for years and years,
20 years.
They knew everything that was going on.
20 years.
Yet they kept him as a client. They didn't have to, but they did. And I take it that the obvious answer is because he had so much money on deposit with him.
He had so much money, and he did have many connections. He brought them a lot of business. He connected them with some of the world's most powerful and wealthiest people. He really did have those connections. Behind the scenes, seeing the thousands and probably now hundreds of thousands of documents that we have access to, some of it was a facade, but some of it wasn't. Jeffrey Epstein truly had more powerful connections than I think anybody else maybe on the planet, because if he was communicating with a foreign prince or a prime minister, those individuals would be coming to Jeffrey Epstein for connections. I mean,
And he would hook them up with the banks.
He would hook them up with the banks, and he would hook them up with other individuals that also could then be hooked up with the banks. So whether it was direct connection or indirect connection, there was, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. It was like 7 degrees of Jeffrey Epstein. There was some way that the bank was going to be rewarded for keeping Jeffrey Epstein on as a client. Now, what I was going to tell you is, when he leaves, JP Morgan fires him. Jeffrey Epstein realizes that one of his prior bankers at JP Morgan has gone to Deutsche Bank, contacts that guy, who then picks right back up with the exact same infrastructure needed for Jeffrey Epstein to continue running his operation. And this time, so that he would stay out of the limelight, he turns his focus almost exclusively to Europeans, to Russians, Ukrainians, Poland.
Girls, you're talking.
Girls, yeah. And he deviates slightly in his operation, but ultimately it's recruiting young girls from over there, 18 or over, but very young. 18 to 20 was his range, telling them that he could get them into the modeling industry, bringing them over from Eastern Europe, paying them through Deutsche Bank accounts, and then taking their passports and essentially enslaving them. They couldn't do anything. He could get them kicked out of the country. He would set them up with modeling gigs or not, and in exchange, they had to do whatever he wanted. So he ultimately became more and more ruthless when he realized, hey, somebody's separated from their parents by a lot of distance, and he capitalized on that. So he never changed his ways till literally the day that he was arrested.
Brad, as I'm listening to you, the one word that keeps going through my mind is evil. Pure evil.
Oh, yeah, as evil as it gets.
And you'd never know it by looking at him if you didn't know who he was. He looked like a normal guy.
But that's what's so evil about him. He's so charismatic. He's a chameleon. He becomes whatever he needs to with everybody in the room, but he has no conscience whatsoever, which makes it very easy for him to pretend like he cares for everybody. He was really good at trying to figure out, like, what does this person need to survive? And what does this person want? Then that turns into what he can promise, and that's the bait. And once he had them, there was no escape, no way out.
As a result of all of this, you've truly become an expert in sex trafficking cases, sexual abuse cases, and I'm very proud of you. I've always thought that the most fulfilling type of cases that I handled as a lawyer over the 27 years I'd practiced were the sexual abuse cases. Yeah. Whether I got money or didn't get money, I was truly helping these survivors deal with something that in many situations is even worse than death.
Yep.
You end up with these horrendous psychiatric problems with post-traumatic stress disorder, which is like the gift that keeps on giving, not a good gift. And I'm sure that you see that play out to this day in a lot of the survivors. No matter how much money they get, that's one of the things that money just can't fix.
No, it can't fix. And as these individuals mature, they encountered new problems as a consequence of the abuse. As somebody gets, at the time when I meet them, they could be at a certain stage in their lives, but then when they go to get married and it causes problems with their marriage, it causes intimacy problems, it causes trust problems with other relationships, things that they don't know are going to be a problem until they actually encounter it years later after a case is over, whether there was a case or not. That's something it's a lifelong treatment plan.
And I discovered all this when I was handling my archdiocese cases, and I saw, I represented a lot of men who had been molested as altar boys, and they were still being affected by this, and I learned that post-traumatic stress disorder, the reason I say it's the gift that keeps on giving is because anything that happens in one's life that's out of the ordinary could be good, could be bad. Could be a birthday, could be a wedding, could be a death or a funeral or an illness. That can set them off and set them right back into this psychic trauma, which is really what makes it insidious.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Brad, 6 months ago, you filed a sex trafficking lawsuit against Abercrombie and Fitch, the retailer. I did a little research about Abercrombie and Fitch. This company was founded in 1892 by Abercrombie, and soon Fitch came along and invested. And they became an iconic sporting goods company. And I used to remember, I'm old enough to, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this. They had these great catalogs, and they had all these great sporting good things, but just cool things, cool new gadgets. And that was their whole business model. Clearly, Mr. Abercrombie and Mr. Fitch must be turning in their graves over what that company became and what happened. So could you take our listeners through your involvement in the Abercrombie and Fitch sex trafficking case? I know it got quite a bit of publicity when it was filed 6 months ago, but not a lot since then. So tell us what happened, tell us what they did, and bring us up to date.
Yeah, in the 90s, the owner of Abercrombie was Les Wexner, who
Another friend of Epstein's, by the way.
who was Epstein's mentor. So
In what way?
the only person Jeffrey Epstein looked up to was Les Wexner. And Jeffrey Epstein had ultimate power of attorney for Les Wexner. He handled all of his businesses. Jeffrey Epstein was Les Wexner's number one right-hand man. In fact, a lot of Jeffrey Epstein's wealth is derived from his relationship with Les Wexner. What we did not know and never discovered while investigating Epstein, and only happened to discover when we started investigating Abercrombie, is that Les Wexner also, in running Abercrombie, was the boss of Mike Jeffries. He made Mike Jeffries the CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch. So Mike Jeffries is at the helm, making a lot of money, and Mike Jeffries is almost solely responsible for changing the image, creating the image that you just described, which that wasn't my thing, so I didn't know it then, but now I've done a lot of research and I see how the advertisement and marketing changed for Abercrombie. But Mike Jeffries was married initially, and then he started a relationship with a man named Matthew Smith. And they had a place in the Hamptons. And on behalf of Abercrombie, Mike Jeffries would have model scouts scour the internet for young models and basically pitch them, once they found a model that he liked, that you're a possibility for the Abercrombie catalog, which at the time was the biggest thing that a male model could ever strive for.
And I know I have a copy of the lawsuit that you filed, and the way it's described in your lawsuit is that he over-sexualized these young men. He was looking for these young boys or young men to be Abercrombie models. And back at the time that you're talking about now, it was a very hot retail brand. It was a very successful marketing campaign, and it created an entire aura, right?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. That also provided cover for what Mike Jeffries was doing behind the scenes. So Jeffries is the head. He's as high as you can get at Abercrombie. If there's anybody that can make Abercrombie happen for a young male model, it's him. And so when a male model has their pictures on Model Mayhem or one of these sites where they're trying to be seen and recognized, and one of Jeffries' people reaches out to him and says, look, I can get you an interview with the actual CEO at his house, an Abercrombie interview, and here's the ground rules. And it's basically the same for every single one of them. Say, David Bradbury is our named plaintiff, and he chose not to go under a pseudonym, so we can talk about that. He's contacted. He's made to wear Abercrombie clothes. He's even made to go by an Abercrombie store so that the flagship store in New York, so that he can be dressed appropriately for his interview at Mike Jeffries' house. He's then taken to this interview at Mike Jeffries' house, and him, similar to the rest of the class members, because we did file this as a class action, is interviewed initially by Mike Jeffries and also at times by Matthew Smith.
At their house in the Hamptons.
At their house in the Hamptons. At the end of the interview, Mike Jeffries and Matthew Smith always turn the situation from your normal casual interview to we have to see you naked into coercive sex acts with other men. And there are always other men in another room that are already engaging in sex acts, and now this model finds themselves there with no way to escape, believing that they're there under this very prestigious company, and what's happening is they're forced into these sex acts. Now, Mike Jeffries did try to have as many heterosexually identified men as possible because he thought that they're less likely to tell on him. which has taken a really long time from the time period that he was doing these things, which ended when he was terminated in 2014, till now when we're finally catching up to speed with just how bad it was. Some of his devious strategy was successful in that it wasn't reported for a long time. The BBC, so British media, they initially started investigating this when they found David Bradbury and some of the other victims that had been forced into this coercive sex with Mike Jeffries. And they asked me whether or not this constituted sex trafficking in a general sense, and asked me to just give them my opinion. And I did. Ultimately, they ran a show over there, and when it came down to it, many of the victims started calling saying, hey, look, is this sex trafficking? I said, this is absolutely a sex trafficking. I know the sex trafficking statute as well as anybody. I've read it 1,000,000 times. There is a civil component to it.
Can you just share with our listeners and viewers just a basic definition of sex trafficking, and then how civilly people can be held responsible for that? I know there's federal statutes, I know there's state statutes, but just give us the overall.
All right, the devil's always in the details, but we won't get too deep in the weeds here. So under 18 U.S.C. 1591 is the sex trafficking statute. Causing an individual to engage in commercial sex in exchange for anything if they are under the age of 18, sex trafficking. If they're not under the age of 18, causing an individual to engage in commercial sex through the use of force, fraud, or coercion is sex trafficking. You're causing somebody who's not a minor through force, fraud, or coercion to engage in sex. Here we have all of them. You have fraud. You're promising them essentially that they could be in an Abercrombie catalog, but it's a bait and switch. You're really just getting them to your house to engage in some sex acts. Or force, there was force used, or coercion. And coercion is the reasonable belief that if they don't engage in sex, they would be subject to harm. Could be financial harm, reputational harm, or other harm.
Or not being able to leave the country because he conveniently has their passports.
Exactly.
Right next to their clothing.
So that's generally sex trafficking. No case that I've ever looked at more squarely fits sex trafficking than this one, where he's recruiting models from all over the place. He's only able to do that through his position at Abercrombie. He's forcing them to wear certain clothing that's all connected to Abercrombie, and then he's forcing them into these coercive commercial sex acts. I'll tell you what happened. We filed the case. You're right. It got a lot of attention. It also got the attention of law enforcement. I think when I and Brittany were going after Jeffrey Epstein, looking back, a lot of prosecutors have egg on their face. A lot of FBI agents have egg on their face. Why didn't you do something sooner? This is something that Brad's been screaming has been happening with Jeffrey Epstein since 2008.
Right, and that was my sentiment the first time I ever looked at the evidence when I first got involved in those cases.
Yeah,
Keep going.
So now we file a case, and I think most look at us and go, this is a law firm that cares about representing crime victims and doing right and never in it for the wrong reason. If they say something happened, it's because they have the evidence. So the FBI opened up an investigation, convened a grand jury, and we actually learned that they started investigating the case. I think that's all that I can really say. I was about to go a little bit further, but I don't think I can. They started investigating the case. So because the FBI is investigating the case and the Eastern District of New York is investigating the case, the defendants in our civil case have asked the judge for a stay, asked the judge to stop the civil case until after the criminal case is over. I don't think that should happen, but
it might.
But it might.
I know that you sued.
But it's not a bad thing. Like, somebody's being prosecuted, fine. We'll eventually get back to our civil case. Whether it's now or later, they can delay the inevitable, but we're eventually coming after them.
Calls to mind the old saying, ask not for whom the bell tolls for thee. And I'm sure they know that. But you sued Abercrombie and Fitch, Michael Jeffries, Matthew Smith, his partner, and the Jeffries Family Office, LLC. What's that?
So a lot of wealthy individuals' life gets complicated when they accumulate significant wealth. They have a bunch of houses. Each one of the homes needs employees. They have to have staff at each one of them. They accumulate boats and planes and cars and other things that require essentially a separate entity, a company, to maintain it. Now, within that company are emails exchanged and who's going to pick up some of the victims and who's going to take them here or there, or what money is going to be transferred. It becomes a separate entity that is committing the crimes, that's assisting, facilitating the commission of the crimes. The other thing about this is individuals, we know, have a right to remain silent, right? They have a Fifth Amendment right to invoke their right to remain silent. Corporations don't. Abercrombie, for instance, if we took a corporate representative of Abercrombie's deposition, they would not be allowed to take the Fifth. Same with the family office. They're going to have to put up an individual who's going to have to answer questions. So, but it's a defendant right at the heart of the case.
And your lawsuit does talk about how this CEO, Jeffries, he had basically unfettered discretion. He ran that company. He did whatever he wanted. He was beyond reproach. I know you're normally answerable to the shareholders when you're a CEO, but he had carte blanche. And I think that's part of your, I know that's part of your reason about why Abercrombie as an entity.
He was Abercrombie.
Yeah, but he controlled it in every way, and he used that as a vehicle to attract these young models. And reading from the complaint here, it says that was the case from the time that he conceptualized over-sexualization of young men to catapult the Abercrombie brand into success. And it remained the case when he used his role as CEO of Abercrombie to prey upon attractive young men who believed that Jeffries was going to hire them as an Abercrombie model, the pinnacle at the time of the modeling industry for men during the relevant time period.
Right.
Does that sum it up?
That does sum it up perfectly. That's exactly what he did. He had, like you say, carte blanche power to do what he wanted to, when he wanted to do it, with very little, if any, oversight.
You'd also mentioned to me another sex trafficking case that you're involved in, involving some orgasmic yoga company or something like that?
Yeah,
Tell us about that.
We filed a sex trafficking case against One Taste, and then the owner of One Taste has now been indicted on the sex trafficking charges. So that case, also the defendants in our case have moved to stay it because there's a parallel criminal case. I also don't think that one should get stayed either, but we haven't had the arguments on it yet. But again, it's they created a platform that was intended for spiritual and mental health and being, and the allegations of the complaint are, and the indictment, are they used it to ultimately sex traffic those who were involved. Force, fraud, or use force, fraud, or coercion to cause them to engage in sex.
So that's still pending as well.
Still pending as well.
So these cases all seem to, the common thread seems to be, they go on for a long time. They're complicated. The civil cases are complicated by the pendency of criminal cases. But I know you work closely with the Department of Justice, with the federal prosecutors, to make justice happen on the criminal side.
I think that what I've done probably different than most civil lawyers in a way that's been appreciated over time by law enforcement is to come in from the very beginning and tell them that if you're represented by me, the criminal case matters more than the civil case does. And for our firm, we care that the criminal case is not negatively impacted by the civil case. So if we get evidence on the civil point during the civil case, we're going to wrap it up in a bow and we're going to deliver it to you. We are never going to do anything that's going to negatively impact your case. So if you want to work with us and tell us what you need and what you don't need, let me know. That's what we're here to do. Our firm is not about trying to pursue some avenue to get some quick payout and move on to the next case. That's not how we practice. That's not how we live. And I think that's gone a long way. So now our relationship with law enforcement, all law enforcement that we've worked with, federal and state, I think is much different than most civil lawyers. I think we have a track record for putting our money where our mouth is and doing what we can to help prosecutors and not get in the way.
I'd say. But and at your relatively young age, you've done so well. You've had so many of these great cases.
I love what I do. Like Brittany and I love, and our whole firm has bought into, we're a family as more than a law firm that care about each other, but also just care about making the world a better place, staying in our lane, staying focused, doing what we enjoy doing. And to me, there's nothing more rewarding than the fact that our former clients are some of our very best friends. And we were able to start this foundation, the Survivors, which is survivors of sex abuse and trafficking, helping other survivors of sex abuse and trafficking. It's right now, Brittany's like pride and joy. All of our efforts are going into it. But being a lawyer is so much fun. You have so much power to do good and to off balance the power of bad guys doing bad. If not us, who else? And if you're not going to do something relentlessly, don't do it. So if there ever comes a point in time where it doesn't feel like we have the same energy and the same zest and the same relentlessness, we will stop. That day's not even close.
You've done so much for so many, and I am so proud of you and all of your accomplishments. And I honestly, from the heart, I feel honored and privileged to have worked with you at all, even for the short time that I did.
I feel the same way.
And I'm glad that I helped make a difference in your life and your career, and keep doing what you're doing, because you're really one of a kind. Brad
really
Edwards,
appreciate it, Russ.
thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it. You're always welcome back.
I'll see you on the pickleball court soon.
If not the pickleball court, I'll see you when Brittany's back here, if you choose to come with her. But I'd love to have you back in the future. This is a hot topic in the world now for the wrong reasons. And I also hope that in the way that litigation makes society better and safer, there will be more accountability, there will be more safeguards, and more steps taken to protect the vulnerable, because really that's what you're all about.
Thank you, Russ.
Thank you so much, and that wraps this episode of the Interesting Lawyers Podcast. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.